friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 20 of the MC Lars podcast. It is Monday, January 14th, which means what? It means that the first month is halfway over of 2019. It's almost 2020. No, I'm playing. But I've got so much excitement happening on the podcast today, and I've got some exciting podcasts coming up. This weekend, I was in Philadelphia hanging out with some of my musical friends, doing some podcasts. I hung out with Joe and Rodney from the Dead Milkmen. I interviewed both of them, so I'm going to do a 2-part series on the Dead Milkmen. And I had bagels with Adam from Adam and His Package, one of my number one influences, and I interviewed him. And we got some great and fantastic material. So that means that the podcast is popping. I've got like 20 on deck of future interviews I've done in the past. So every Monday, just keep listening. Thank you very much for listening. I've been having a good year so far. I've been reading Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, and I want to do some Patreon songs about this complex, important, strange book that I got into David Foster Wallace because years ago, a friend of mine from college, he told me about his book, Signifying Rappers, which was like essays about Boston rap in the 80s that Foster Wallace wrote before he started his graduate thesis. And so I read that book and I had my ears open to this guy. And then I never heard about this book till like years later, Infinite Jest. I started reading it like last year, but it was very complicated. So I'm reading it now. I'm reading it with a book called Elegant Complexity, which is kind of a summary of it that helps you stay on track. So you'll hear more about that. But yes, I'm on the Infinite Jest tip, and you'll hear some songs about that book. This week, we've got Marcelo Vignali, and this dude is incredible. I interviewed him because, I'm a big Roger Rabbit fan, and he was the lead designer on the Who Framed Roger Rabbit ride at Disneyland and Tokyo Disney. And he did some of the voices on the characters, and he's just an incredible guy. But his filmography, his IMDb page, is off the charts. He worked, of course, on Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. He worked on Transylvania, Surf's Up, Atlantis. It goes on. Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. It's just like incredible. And he's interesting because he worked in cell animation at Disney. Then he started working in CGI, and he works at Sony now, Sony Animation. So we did the interview at Sony Animation Studios. He gave me a tour of the place, and he took me on a tour all around Culver City and showed me all these historical movie sites. We had dinner. It was just crazy, like how nice this dude was. And you can see how his art, he has a spiritual approach. And it was really cool talking to him about the Roger Rabbit ride, which is amazing. And I was at Disneyland like a few days after that with my family. And I got up early and I went to the park by myself. And I rode the ride like 4 or 5 times by myself. There was no line. The people working there were like, you must really like this ride. And I knew it was time to go. So that's what's up. I want to give a shout out to Patreon supporters, of course, new ones. James McLaughlin, Kenna, and John. Thank you all for signing up. And some of my old supporters, Laura, Philip, and Kelly. Thank you. You keep me moving. You keep this podcast alive. Oh, I've been doing every week I have a schedule. So this is the Lars production schedule for what's happening when I'm not on tour, because I want to keep you guys informed and entertained and give you all that flavor. So Monday, you already know the podcast drops. Tuesday, that's when I put out a puppet parody video. And that's a new series I started where I take a popular song or an older song, rewrite the lyrics and re-record it and sync it with a puppy. That'd be funny. A puppy parody. No, a puppet. So every Tuesday on YouTube, those are coming. I did Skittle Mode by this week, a parody of Sicko Mode by Travis Scott. Last week, Tomorrow, I did Cardi B's song Money, and I called it Honey because honey's delicious. So every Tuesday, those are going to come out. Every Wednesday, I'm putting out a new 27th Street. There's a hashtag on Twitter, right? Wednesday Wisdom. I don't know if 27th Street gives you much wisdom. You can look at the archive at mclars. The archive is on my Tumblr, but you can get there by going to comics.mclars.com. Yeah, comics.mclars.com takes you to the Tumblr. And I started this strip in 2002. And yes, there are times when like it was intermittently being done, but there are hundreds of them on there and you can read them. Some of them don't make sense. I have little descriptions on like some of the inside joke Stanford ones, but I've had a blast doing the 27th Streets. Thursday, I'm on Twitch, and I'm going to be doing retro games this year. I was doing Switch games, and like I did Sonic the Hedgehog last Thursday. And while I love that game, like it's I guess that is kind of like an old school one. I'm going to be doing the old classic NES, Super NES, Game Boy games Thursday for 2 hours, usually from 1 to 3 Eastern Standard Time. If you go to twitch.tv/MCLars, it says it. And then Friday, Freestyle Fridays. So that was a huge success last week. I figured out a way to hook up my sound system, my DSLR camera, do a green screen. It's just been really freaking fun. So Freestyle Fridays. So that's what's up. And we're going to keep it moving. Going to the UK with Ruled by Raptors, Mega Ran, and Cuckoo Kangaroo this spring. NerdcoreTour.com for tour dates. Doing a US tour this spring too. Can't announce it yet, but stay tuned. And in the meantime, check out my amazing interview with the legendary Marcelo Vignali. Oh, yes. Before we get into that, after the interview, I play my Benny the Cab song, Hop In, I'm Benny the Cab, which came out like 2 years ago on Patreon as a demo, a rough mix. Then last summer, we re-recorded it and remastered it and tweaked it and put it on the Notes from Toontown EP as the final track. So this is the version from Notes from Toontown. If you sign up on Patreon, you can get the unmastered, older demo version, like you can get some of the rare stuff. And because Roger Rabbit's cartoon spin, you're in a runaway taxi, it's kind of like appropriate, right? So Benny the Cab. You hear about why all the taxis are called Lenny in this interview. Usually they're supposed to be different names, but something got messed up, so they're all called Lenny. So that's what's up. Okay, thank you for listening. I'm MC Lars. Here's my new friend, my inspirational homie, Marcelo Vignali. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the MC Lars podcast. We have a really cool, interesting, unique guest this week, and we'll just jump right into it. Marcelo Vignali, born in Baltimore.
It's funny, my name sort of has this roundabout way of actually, coming into fruition. My mother, when she was about 15 years old, had two other best friends, and they're living in Argentina. We're going way back, the 1950s. And their Leonardo DiCaprio, their heartthrob back then, was an actor by the name of Marcello Mastroianni. And they made a pact between the three of them that if they had a boy, they would name their son Marcello after the actor. Well, my mom moved away. She moved to the United States. This is 1961. And she never heard from those friends because back then you didn't have Facebook and things like that. And then as you're growing up and you're moving and things like that, first she started with, kept in contact with letters, but then all of that sort of goes away. So she lost complete contact with these women. Well, it wasn't till Facebook came about and she got on Facebook and one connection turned into another connection, turned into another connection. She reconnected with those friends again. And all three of them all got married, all had families, all became widows. And all three named one of their sons Marcello. So I am one of three, I guess.
Have you been in touch with any of the other sons?
Just one of the other sons.
They all made good on their pact.
That's right. They all made good on their pact. So there it is.
I saw you posted you went to see Into the Spider-Verse with your mom, right?
Yes.
And she's so proud of you, I bet.
Oh my gosh, she is so proud of me. And she's been proud of me really my whole life, both my brother and I. She's always been one of these moms that's been incredibly supportive. And sometimes you don't think that it's those little things that are going to make the difference. I'm sure there's, people probably even listening to this podcast, they would downplay the significance of some of the smaller things that they do. Oh, it's not going to matter. Oh, the kids won't remember it. They do remember it. And I remember getting this box of 64 crayons. We didn't have much money back then. We're, immigrants that came to the United States, really with nothing. And I remember having that box of 64 crayons. It was usually like the 12 crayons. That's all we had. But then one day I think it was for Christmas, it was the box of 64 crayons. I couldn't believe my eyes. And the very next year, I got another box of 64 crayons. And that was the kind of love and support that I used to get from my mom. Mom really believed in us. She always supported us. If I did something she knew I was proud of it went up on the refrigerator. It was a big deal. And I think it's that kind of involvement and support that makes a difference in people's lives. I know for myself that when you think of, how does somebody believe in themselves? As a little kid, there has to be that moment where you believe in yourself. And I think that those moments come from things like that, where, you have somebody else that believes in you, somebody else that says, yes, you can do it. Really does make all the difference in the world.
And she recognized that talent in you at a young age. You must have been drawing constantly, I bet.
Well, the thing is, my brother was an artist, and I just wanted to be just like him. So he was really good. Well, here's the thing is, my mom, I guess I come from a very creative family because my mom was a seamstress and she used to make dresses and she would make clothing. She made all our clothing when we were kids, and she would sit there, just lay material out. She'd just start cutting, sewing it, and there, you had a shirt, you had pants, you had whatever it was that she was making. She would make these things.
Cool.
But she just had this idea about what she wanted. She would make the patterns and everything. My dad was a bricklayer. And so he would get these ideas and he would take a pencil and he would just kind of sketch out. It wasn't like a three-dimensional beautiful drawing, but he would sketch out the design of what he wanted, and then he would build it. And he could do those things. He made all kinds of, made this giant bird house. It's an entire aviary in part of the house. It was crazy. We had like all these wild birds flying around. It's incredible.
That's cool.
So that's the kind of stuff that he would do. And so I never thought anything of it that my brother was drawing. I thought like, well, yeah, I guess this is just something that everybody does. And I didn't think about it being something particularly unique or special, but I knew I wanted to be like my brother.
Yeah. Did he end up going to arts also?
No, he didn't. It was a curious thing because we were always drawing together. And I remember, imagine how young I was, but he started school when he was 5 and I'm 2 years younger. So that would make me 3. Well, I remember that he used to go from, I guess, like 8 o'clock it was probably 8 o'clock to noon. So I would take the chair. I would ask my mom, is it almost time? And she would say, yes, it's almost time. So I would take the chair and push it to the wall, climb. I remember all of this. And I would climb on the chair and hold on to the back of the chair and look out the window and wait for him to come back. And I was so desperate. As soon as he would come in, I would ask him, do you want to draw? And then we would sit down and we would draw. And that was it. And so later on, this is probably, we would make books together and all kinds of things. We're always something creative. We'd make our own toys. He was really good with it was called an erector set. And you could make things out of metal and screws and stuff. And he would make all kinds of things, and we would make our toys and make characters and things like that. And I'd make posters. And books. We always made books, little storytelling books. But at a certain point, I started getting very, very good, and I started to surpass his level. And I think that as kids, especially siblings, you're always looking for an identity. And he realized that his identity, or that was my identity, and so he went off into electronics. And so today he works in robotics.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. So he used his creative skills.
He did, but but at one point we were very much on the same path. But then at a certain point, people's paths diverge when you realize, that's your thing. That's not my thing. My thing is this. There was something else that he wanted.
A common theme, Marcelo, through this podcast is inspiration and the teachers that come into our life and the people who guide us and inspire us. Like there's a reason for that. There's people are put into our life, whether you can call it divine providence or a coincidence or something to teach you something. And, maybe like him passing on that passion to you, and then all the creativity you've been able to do was like a gift to you. Do you ever think about that in that way?
Oh my gosh. There have been so many times that people have had that relationship for me. I always wanted to have a mentor. And I realized that as I worked in the business, I've had very few of that interaction. I've had a few instances where I had, somebody that was perhaps about 10 years older than me kind of show me the ropes, but I really didn't have a really strong mentor presence, somebody that would sort of shepherd me into the industry. But that doesn't mean that I didn't have mentors and that I didn't have people that were inspiring me. One of the things, and this was one of those where it was such an eye-opening experience. I know this sounds funny because, I was growing up in Baltimore, in Maryland. And Maryland is just, if you look at the state, it's the only reason the state exists is to encompass Chesapeake Bay. I mean, the whole darn thing, right?
Yeah.
And they had this the shipment was coming in from Argentina. And somehow my family found out about it because they always would, when they were buying things from Argentina, like tea and foods and stuff like that, more cultural things. Well, the ship was coming in, and they were going to somehow, I don't know how this worked out, but they managed to get us, when the ship arrived, a tour on the ship. So we got to meet the captain, and they took us around. And one of the little, I don't know what you would call it, one of the crewmen's rooms, it was really no bigger than probably 2 times the size of a closet. And he had this, it was just enough for his bunk and a desk. But all over his walls, he had all these drawings. And I looked, and it was the first time I had met anyone that was an adult that worked, or an adult that did drawings. I don't know whatever happened to him. I don't even remember his name because I was probably about 7 or 8 years old, so I just don't remember that. And I kept this drawing for the longest time, but we moved around so much at some point I lost it. But we had, I met this guy, and he was so kind, and he took the time to say, "Oh, so you're an artist too?" And he was showing me all his work, and he had all these cowboys riding horses. And it was, if I remember correctly, it was very much like this would have been like 1972, and it was probably right around the time, like a Jean Girard doing Mobius or something. But it was these beautiful things. Anyway, he says, "Oh, so you're an artist too? Here, show me what you can draw." So he gave me a sheet of paper, and I sat there, and I was drawing side by side with him, and he was drawing cowboys and stuff. And I remember that was such a wonderful moment, and that was a gift. That was a gift that I carry that with me today. That's such an inspiring moment, and every now and then I'm reminded of that, and I think, am I creating that moment for somebody else? And I always try to be cognizant of that, because you never know when those opportunities are going to come up. You have an opportunity to crush somebody, or you have an opportunity to build somebody up, and who knows what that somebody is capable of. 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, 50 years down the road, what's that person going to do?
Yeah.
And then here like I said, here I was on that ship, probably, I'm guessing it was like maybe 1972, maybe 1973, and here we are all these many years later, and I've been a professional artist working in the industry, and yeah.
That's a beautiful story, man. You one of your first drawings, your first cartoon was in the National Catholic Register.
Yeah.
I read an interview where you mentioned that.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. When I was going to art school, I guess I was in my sophomore year in art school, they had a bulletin board, and they were looking for artists. Now, they didn't want to pay that much, so they're reaching out to the kids at school, like, "Hey, can you do this work?" And it's like, "Oh yeah, and I can do a professional level job." So I go down there, and I interviewed for the position to do illustrations for the National Catholic Register, and I got the job. Oh, that moment was electric. I remember I was all calm, shaking hands with them. "Yes, yeah, sure, yeah." We'd agreed on a price and this and that, and they gave me the photographs that they needed me to draw. And it was of Cardinal Ratzinger, who would later on become Pope. And I had to do his drawing his portrait. And I remember I got into the elevator, and there's nobody else in the elevator with me, and the elevator doors closed. And when they closed, oh my gosh, I jumped and pumped my fist, and I couldn't believe that was it. I was now a professional artist.
Wow. And I bet you framed it or kept it?
I still have it. It's not framed,
Yeah.
but I still have that.
That's special,
that drawing,
man.
Yeah.
You've done commercial illustration, TV animation, computer game art, theme park design, and you're one of the few people who was both an Imagineer artist and you worked for Disney Animation, right?
Yeah.
That's cool.
It's a pretty unique distinction. Very few people. I mean, you have guys like John Hanch, Claude Coates, Mark Davis. So there are a few people that I think Sam McKim also. So there are very few people that have actually been able to work at both sides, both in animation and in theme park design. So I feel like I'm am sort of a distinguished crowd of people.
A very small group of people.
Yeah.
Did you prefer doing one or the other, or they're just so different?
And sometimes people ask me, and they'll ask me like, well, what's better to work on? Is it better to work on a film that's a blue sky when the sky's the limit, or working in production, or working in theme park design, or working in animation? And I think each one comes with its own benefits. It comes with its own joy, and it comes with its own rewards that you don't get in the others.
Okay.
But that doesn't necessarily make that good or bad. It's just different. And that's why I think sometimes, like when artists are trying to select the road and like, oh gosh, I don't know which is the better road to take. I've actually been down several of these roads, and I can say there is no right or wrong answer. You're not going to go into theme park design and you think like, oh gosh, boy, did I make a terrible mistake with my life. No, that can actually turn into a fantastic livelihood. You can have a tremendous life. You can do amazing things, but it just depends. What do you want? What do you want to do? So like I said, each one comes with its own sort of unique charm. I will tell you this, and some of those moments are electric. It's like jumping in the elevator when I got that job for the newspaper. But the other one was, I remember I was working at Imagineering and working on Toontown, and I had to design the trolley, the Toontown trolley that's going to go up and down the whole land. And it's a big trolley. People can stand in it, ride you around. Well, I'm the designer. I'm the creator of that. So I did some designs, and I sent that away. 2 weeks later, my friend Joe Lanzistro comes to me and he says, "Hey, do you want to go see your trolley?" I'm like, "What?" He goes, "They've got it mocked up." So what they would do is at Imagineering, they would build a wooden mock-up. Means that somebody would spec out how big the thing was going to be, and they would build a mock of it, all made out of wood, but everything to spec, so that they would actually create molds off of this thing. And they would do all the show set drawings after the fact because they didn't know how big or how small it needed to be. Or the roof, like when you were standing. I mean, these are just things that they were trying to work out in the mock-up.
Yeah.
I'm like, yes, I want to go see it. And it was the craziest thing. It was on my desk 2 weeks earlier.
Yeah.
And here I am walking into the Mapo building. It was named Mapo for Mary Poppins.
Okay.
So I go to the Mapo building, and this is where they were building all this stuff. And there it was. There was the mock-up of my Toontown trolley.
Wow.
In wood. I mean, it wasn't painted or anything like that.
Yeah.
It was all in like woods and plywoods and things like that. And they actually had some metal work already on it just to create the structure for it. And I got inside of it. Go on, sit down, sit inside it. What do you think? I was like, I can't believe it. So awesome. It's another one of those things. It's just electric. You don't. It was something. It happened so quickly. I didn't expect it, and because of that was really a thrilling moment.
And you were young when you were working.
Oh my
there,
gosh!
right?
Yeah. I finished art school in '87. Then I worked in animation, TV animation, all the way through 1989. And in 1989, I was hired by Disney Imagineering to paint these posters. And it's one of those where sometimes you have to work really hard, and you have to also get lucky. But Arnold Schwarzenegger made the best quote about that. And he said, but you'll realize that the harder you work, the luckier you get. And so I had in my portfolio, had all these acrylic paintings that I had done, all these acrylic illustrations. And when I went to interview there, they were kind of like, yeah, sure. And they're looking at stuff. When they got to the acrylic illustrations, it was exactly what they were looking for, because one of their artists had painted he was supposed to do a series of 6 posters. He painted 3 of them, and for whatever reason, he had moved on to a different project, and he wasn't going to come back to finish them. And they needed to get somebody to finish the posters. And I just happened to show up with the right work. So They gave me the job, and I painted the posters for him. But that was supposed to be it, just do the posters. But I did such a good job, they offered me a full-time position there. And that was it, and I was in. But
do you remember what the posters were of?
Yeah, they were the M&M's posters because M&M's was sponsoring the Star Tours
Oh, cool.
ride. So I painted three M&M's posters for Disney and M&M's, I guess.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Do you ever have a moment where you will go and, like, for instance, going to Disneyland and seeing those posters and for a second forgetting that, like, you created it because it's seamlessly part of this universe, you know what I mean? Or like seeing your work and it's so good that it's hard to recognize. Do you know what I mean? For a second, you're like, oh, I painted that. That's
No.
yeah.
No, I don't see that at all. You know, it's unfortunate, but when you work on a project, a lot of times all you see are the flaws. It's only I am so critical, and the thing is, and this is actually a good thing, because if I wasn't critical with my work, I wouldn't demand so much of myself. But at the same time, if you're really critical of your work, you can't stand to have it around you. And so I can't have any of my artwork in my house. I look at it, and there are parts of it I just keep looking at, because I don't stop drawing it when I stop drawing it.
Right.
2 years later, I look at it, and I'm still drawing it in my mind, and I still want to fix things and change things. And yeah, and those things just stay in your head. They don't leave.
That's kind of the benefit and the beauty of a collaboration, right? Like having someone manifest the Toontown Trolley from your art. Well, I guess it's done,
Yes.
right? Someone converted it to this.
Yeah, and you know, and that's a really true thing, because I'm not critical of other artists.
Yeah.
I really enjoy art. I really enjoy what other artists do. But for myself, I know that because you go into that process, you really go into a drawing or you go into a painting, and it's so complex that your mind engages in it completely, and you, in order for you to complete that, and that process doesn't stop when the artwork is done.
And I guess if it did, then you might not be spurred to make more art and increase your skills and become better. Like if you're like, oh, it's a perfect painting, you know, I'm done, right?
Yeah.
It makes you want to do better next time.
And that's right. And that's the thing. That's the muse of art. You know, like when people talk about, oh, the artist and his muse, and usually people reference that, you know, this beautiful woman that is his, you know, the artist's muse. But the art muse is the elusiveness of beauty. You're trying to create your art, and you know, that's the that's that search for beauty, that search, and it can be whatever it is that somebody's looking for. It doesn't have to be in a human figure or anything. Somebody's painting, like Monet was trying to paint these wonderful cloud-like forms, and he could find them in all different things. And when you look at the way light was changing, that was beauty, and that was his muse. It was the way light would change from just 5 minutes. You would get a different light source, and that's where he painted the cathedral. And he every 15 minutes he would change out the painting, and he would keep going, just so that he would always paint them at the same time to try and catch that light. That was his muse.
Yeah.
And so different artists have that muse, and it's so elusive, and you spend your whole lifetime, your whole career going after that. If you ever catch it, it would die. Because you've satiated that part of you. So it has to be elusive. It has to always be out of your grasp. And a lot of young people struggle because I think as artists, we really beat ourselves up. We question ourselves. We question whether or not we made the right decision or went into the right career, and whether or not that drawing is good enough or whatever. And we really torture ourselves as a result of that. But I made peace with that, and I reconciled it, because if I didn't have that, that's my muse. If I didn't have that, I wouldn't push myself to do better. I wouldn't push myself to excel. I've seen people where they plateau in their career because they get very good, they get very confident, and that's it. And then it's done. And you can see that they lose that spark. They lose that interest. And that's almost like an early death for an artist for that reason, that they just lose the energy. Their artwork loses that vitality because they've become comfortable and confident. So as an artist, you have to walk this fine line of insecurity and confidence. If you have too much confidence, you kill your art. and you don't push yourself to excel.
Right.
If you have too much insecurity, you kill yourself. You become suicidal because you're so filled with dread and doubt, and you torture yourself. And so you as an artist, and it isn't that you just straddle that line and stay on it. No, as an artist, you're constantly teetering from one side to the other. At one point, you are filled with self-doubt. And other points you're filled with confidence. And then you're going back and forth and back and forth. And it sounds crazy that you would say like, oh, well, Marcelo's very accomplished. He has all of these credits under his belt, and he's been working as a professional for so many years that he would be confident about what he can do. And I tell you the truth, that I continue to teeter back and forth between that. There's between confidence and insecurity constantly. I've been doing it my whole career. But I've made peace with that because I realize that is the process. And if I lose that, then I'll actually lose why I love doing it.
That's beautiful explanation. And that kind of gives me a deeper understanding. And I think the listeners will appreciate that imagery too. And, a lot of the literary romantics talk about the idea of the sublime, right? Something that's so inspirational, like a sunset or looking at the Grand Canyon, that it transcends your senses, right? And there's that poem, John Keats, The Ode on a Grecian Urn, where the coda is, beauty is truth and truth is beauty. And he describes this urn that has this Greek scene and how it's kept these characters alive through time, through eternity. And that there's truth in that because it's documenting this important moment. And the poem kind of celebrates the artist. And it's really a special poem. And I wonder if you think about this in terms of your legacy in 1,000 years, in 5,000 years, people seeing your work and your signature and being like, oh, this guy really had an impressive career, because there's something about art that lasts forever in a way. Do you ever think about that or no?
Yeah, getting into the philosophy of art. When I was in art school, I came across for me, what was sort of the quintessential role of an artist. And it was actually penned by Charles Baudelaire. He was a French poet. And he wrote that he was actually talking about Émile Zola. And in describing it, he said that the role of an artist is to extract the eternal from what is transitory. And I've never forgotten that.
It's great.
And when you think about, well, what is it? What is the role of an artist? And an artist, that is the quintessential role of an artist, is to be able to look at something that everybody else sees as mundane and find what is eternal about that. And if you can do that, if you can extract from whatever is contemporary and pull out this beauty, this truth from that and say, this is eternal. If you can do that, you've done your job as an artist. And that's when things last. It doesn't matter. I really love that when you think of like a Shakespeare. Shakespeare wrote the King Lear. Then Akira Kurosawa, the director, takes it and he adapts it and he makes the movie Ron. So this Shakespeare writes it in the 1400s. Then you've got Akira Kurosawa, who makes this movie in the 20th century, and he makes it at about. And the movie takes place in feudal Japan. But despite it bouncing all over all these different genres, it is such an eternal truth that Shakespeare was able to write that it doesn't matter. You could make that movie another 100 years from now and it would still work.
Right.
And that's when you realize that what he had done in writing that story, that he had extracted what was eternal from what's transitory. So it doesn't matter if it's set in the medieval age, the Renaissance,
or in space in the future,
or in space, or in feudal Japan. It doesn't matter, because he's talking about a human condition that is so eternal that's what he managed to do. He managed to grab that truth, and then he's sharing that truth with us.
That's awesome. I do a lot of work with kids and hip hop workshops, and one of the things I do is take old poems and stories and turn them into educational rap songs and videos. And I actually did King Lear. So as one of my songs. So it's kind of cool that you mentioned that. And thinking about this idea of transmedia, right? Like stories that go from Shakespeare to the movie or to a song or to a poem. Like the idea that certain things, once they're extrapolated, because they're timeless, have kind of their own agency, right? And that's like an interesting concept, like art being able to, and I mention this because the connection between Imagineering and animation, it's all about distilling one idea and then translating it, right? Finding the essence. For instance, like Roger Rabbit was kind of like a movie that was brought in the second golden age of animation in a way, right? It kind of heralded that in. And you designed a ride that was, you took the essence of the movie and you translate it into this story that kind of exists without having ever needing to have seen the movie because it's timeless.
Yeah, and that was the thing is that was a great opportunity. That really was. When I think about something like that having landed in my lap at the young age that I just got to Disney. So it was in '89 I got to Disney. By 1990, they had dropped, I think it was a $40 million ride, $40 million on my shoulders. It's like, here, now it wasn't like they stuffed it in my pockets, right? That would have been great. I would have retired. No, but what they did is they trusted me and said, we want this ride. We're going to build this ride for $40 million. We want you to design what that's going to be. And that was it. And I'm like, wow, this is fantastic. And I knew I couldn't, because people weren't going to see the movie. They weren't going to see, because I realized, even back then, I realized that movie existed in a place and time, and it told a particular story. If I stuck to that story, then audiences that came in the future to see it would be confused because they weren't familiar with the story.
Sure.
So what I had to do is I said, no, what Wolf did was created a world. I'm going to take you into that world. And so from that, I tried to extrapolate what was the truth about that world and then share that. And that's where we thought, like, okay, people are a lot more familiar with the cartoon world than they are with that specific movie.
Yeah.
So what is it that we can do in this world? And so there were certain things that we tried to come up with. Okay, what do you want to do in a cartoon world? Well, I want to do this. I want to do that. And then one of those, we knew that we had to stick with the framework that the movie created, but then also create experiences that weren't necessarily specific to that movie. And one of those was, I remember I said, I want to get blown up. Well, how are we going to do that? And that's what we did. So that's when you go into the giant machine that swallows you and Roger hits that button, he gets electrocuted, the whole thing blows up, and then we have smoke and then these giant swirls, and we go through the swirls, and when everything opens up, we're actually falling back down to earth.
Yeah.
So we've just suffered this concussion. We've lost track of several seconds. Next thing, as we're coming to, we're falling to earth. Yeah. So that was a lot of fun. So that's the kind of thing, is that's not in the movie, but we knew that it would be an essential part of an experience of what it is to be a toon.
That directing, almost like creating a comic book or creating a whole interactive experience, imagination, sky was the limit, right? In that example, quite literally, right?
Exactly. And one of the things that we found, like a story can be linear and a ride can be linear, but more than linear, it has to be kinetic. You have to feel as though, like you have those little marbles and one hits the other and the other one moves.
Yeah.
That's how it has to be. It has to create this kinetic energy where one thing affects this other element and that other element affects something else. And then it creates this chain that you can follow. It's a visual chain that you can follow.
Yeah.
And you can't rely on dialogue to do that.
Right.
And that's why we knew that the ride had to be different than just retelling the story of the movie.
You voiced some of the characters, like you voiced the gorilla,
right?
right?
I voiced the gorilla. It's funny because they modify my voice, but it's like, what's the secret password? And then they lowered it a little bit more, and it sounds like the gorilla. Yeah.
What's the story with the cabs? They all say Lenny, right? Are they supposed to be Benny's brother or something?
Yeah. Well, that was it. when we were designing the ride, this is kind of a funny way that whole thing came about.
Yeah.
When we were designing the ride, I had this idea that all the cabs would have different names. It would be Kenny, there would be Lenny, and there would be Jenny. There's all of these different cabs. But I had to do a show set drawing, and the show set drawing is a drawing that is then sent to the people that there were outside vendors that were going to be making the fiberglass mold for it. I did the actual drawings for that because we wanted to make sure that they stayed on model. Made the whole package, and then that went out. Well, there was a goof up to a certain extent, and it's sort of a chain of things that happened. So from that, they sent it to the vendor. The vendor didn't just build the mold, but they also took it to paint. And at that point, they didn't get the updated version, which was that they were going to have different license plates. And they all came back as Lenny. Now, it could easily have been remedied. They could easily oh, yeah, we'll just put different names on it. And, you make a sticker sheet. Sure. Then it would have a different name. You cut it out and boom, you put it on. But Joe Lanzisro, who was the art director for the whole land, he just thought that it was a very funny idea. And he said, let's keep it. And so that's why they're all Lenny.
That they're all the same cab, or they're clones, right?
Yeah, or I don't know. They're just a sort of hey, here's my cousin Lenny. Yeah, and my other cousin Lenny, and my brother Lenny, that kind of a thing. So he saw that and he thought, that's funny. Let's keep it.
It's the one ride at Disneyland that is has a very good sense of humor throughout, like the Bull in the China Shop.
I'm actually the voice of the Bull in the China Shop as well. And I'll give you a sampling of my acting abilities. That was it. That was, and they recorded that, and that's my moo. That's my claim to fame right there.
That's pretty good. Now when I go, I'll think about that. I'll think about you doing that. And Marcelo, there was talk that it was supposed to be there was going to be a second. It was going to be like a 2-level ride, right?
Yeah.
I know you've spoken about this.
That's, oh my gosh, that was a dark period on that ride. When sometimes you always think of, that's why I said sometimes when I'm looking at my artwork, I think of what could have been, not necessarily what is. And that was one of those where, we had a particular idea about what that ride was going to be like. So it was going to be a 2-tiered system or a double-decker, 2 floors. We were going to be moving around the bottom, then we were going to go upstairs, and then we're going to go through the upstairs, break out at some point. And there was a big balcony, and everyone would be able to see the cab spinning going across from one thing to another. So when you come into the land, there's something kinetic up there, and you're looking, you're like, oh my gosh, look, there's people up on that balcony spinning. Let's go ride that ride.
Okay.
So that was the idea. Great. It was a fantastic idea to do that. If you think about it, it was the same thing that you have in Alice in Wonderland. You see the caterpillar pops out for a short while and then ducks back into the ride. People see that, and it attracts attention. So we thought, okay, that's what we're going to have. So we designed the whole ride and everything. We had all the floors laid out. We did all the CAD drawings, and the CAD is the computer-aided drawings. And so we had all of that stuff worked out. We were building the model, doing all the show set stuff. Really kind of far along in that process, we went to a meeting, and one of the gentlemen that was doing the development for the ride system, he told us, he said, we can't do it. The ride vehicle that we have isn't strong enough to pull us up that hill. And so that they would have to come up with a different system to get us all the way up the hill. And I think there was another problem, which was in order to do that, you needed because it was a bus bar system. In order to do that, you needed a 3-wheeled vehicle to do it. 3 wheels, why? Because if you have 4 wheels, when you come up to a bump, let's say it's turning, it's going to go up a hill, one of the wheels will be off the ground, and you can't have that.
Right, okay.
So it has to have 3 wheels, so they're always making contact. And they couldn't deliver that. So they had told us one thing, but when we started getting into the nitty-gritty, they would not be able to deliver that. And I remember that Joe Lanzisro, the director of the land, he just had this sort of, all the blood had drained from his face. He looked really pale. And it was one of those, like, I remember talking to him, and he's like, what do we do? Do we, and I kind of assumed that we would try and get a different system that we get. It's like, no, that's not going to happen. We have to make it a one-floor system. Whole ride has got to be on the lower floor. And it was one of those where, okay, all right, well, now we have to be much more economical about our use of space. I did a whole drawing of the layout. I worked it all out, really tight, everything. All the space is really, really well utilized. And I think in the long run, we had only, because a large part of that ride was actually eaten up by the ramp going up and the ramp going down, that we only ended up losing just, like maybe, several feet or something, like another 50 feet of ride. It's all we lost because I had made such an economical model of that. We built a CAD system. It fit. The CAD system actually would work within it. I'm like, oh my gosh, we did it. We actually pulled it off. And I think, it's just a funny thing, is sometimes you think it's adversity. Oh, it's going to be a lesser ride. I think it's a better ride than the ride we had originally that was a two-floor ride. With the exception is that I really wish that we would have been able to pop out.
Yeah.
But aside from that, it was a better layout. It was a better track than the one that we had before.
And you had a unique challenge because being able to spin 360 degrees, you had to make sure everywhere the audience looked, there's something going on, as opposed to Haunted Mansion, which is like the camera is static, right?
Yeah, in Haunted Mansion they have a fantastic ride system, which is the Omnimover, and it indexes you what you want to see, so it can reveal things. It can turn and reveal something to you, which is really exciting. It's very cinematic. We did not have that. Now, that we could turn it any which way, so we had to create a three-dimensional ride experience. We had to create environments that if somebody's spinning, that they wouldn't miss the story, and it's still that they would be in a really fun environment. That was it. And so another thing that we had done, which was, and this is Ann Militello, I think her name was. We're going back several years. But she was one of the top lighting people in theater, doing fantastic work. And she came to work with us, and she helped us with our lighting. And that's when I learned the importance of being able to use light as a means by which to direct people's attention. And she did a fantastic job in lighting our show. I think that really was sort of our cinematic tool that we were using to make sure people were looking at the right things.
Was that the intention originally, to make it a blacklight ride, or did she?
Yeah,
cool.
blacklight.
That's cool, man. So when opening day, it must have been exciting as heck, right? To go there, and I'm sure you were there and one of the first people to ride it, right?
I wasn't one of the first people to ride it, but I remember that when I went there, I went to the ride and I rode through the ride, and there it was. It was because I went through several times when we were building it.
Yeah.
Seeing the figures and everything and walking through, but to actually get on the ride and ride it. And I rode it, and I got off, and I just sat there at the end of the ride, watching people coming off, just looking at the expressions on their faces. And that was it. And we start thinking about the kind of gift that you can give. That was my gift. And I was watching them wearing it on their faces.
That's awesome.
I was really moved.
That's awesome, man. Since then, you've moved on and you've done so many other things. Did you, after Disney, is that when you went to Sony? Or
no? Well, yes.
Yeah.
So from Disney Imagineering, I ended up going to Disney Feature. So when I went to Disney Feature, I worked on Mulan. Then I left the studios and I left California, and I continued working as a freelancer. At that point, I continued doing development for the films. I worked on Kingdom of the Sun, which later became Emperor's New Groove. I worked on Atlantis. I worked on Home on the Range. What was some of the other ones? Oh, and Brother Bear, Lilo and Stitch. And I worked on the 2D version of Frozen when it was called The Snow Queen.
Really?
Yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
amazing. Was it going to be cell animation then?
It was going to be
originally?
cell animation way back. Well, it was back then. They weren't using cell. I think the
Yeah.
last one they did cells was Little Mermaid, but it
Mm.
was going to be 2D, so it was going to be all animated, all by hand.
Wow.
But at that point, the studio was in a transition. The industry was in transition, and 2D animation simply went by the wayside.
Wow. And the last 2D animation movie wasn't it Winnie the Pooh was one of Disney's last ones after the Frog Princess? I might be wrong, but
I think you're right.
yeah.
I think you're right. Yeah, the Frog Princess came out, and then you had Winnie the Pooh. But I didn't work on either one of those.
Do you think that 2D animation will ever come back as like in retro vogue?
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. Here's my theory on why 2D animation collapsed. That I think 2D animation has a vitality that CG animation does not have. And there's a joy and a charm and a strength that CG animation can never do. And CG animation has the ability to create things that 2D animation cannot do. So they're different things. But the more 2D animation pretended to be CG, the more it made itself irrelevant. So when you think of, let's say, Beauty and the Beast, and there's that beautiful ballroom, and the ballroom starts spinning, that was sort of the beginning where Disney was very focused on trying to make a very 3D world. Well, actually, it was before that, and this is with the Great Mouse Detective, with Ratigan climbing up the gears. Then they built that room for Beauty and the Beast, and then later on in Mulan, they had or in Lion King, they had all of the antelope running. And so little by little, they started creating things that the computer allowed them to create. And it just makes sense that, yes, that's what you want to create. You want to use that to create things, to push the 2D medium. But at a certain point, they kept trying to make things more and more 3D and more realistic, that at a certain point, 3D could do it better. CG animation could do that better. And that's when 2D animation became irrelevant. I think 2D animation is at its best, and it's at its most relevant when it is not 3D. When you think of something like in Aladdin, the genie in Aladdin, you can't do that character in 3D animation. Can you imagine what the rig would be like, how heavy that thing would be, so that it could transform itself into all these different things? You'd have to have so many different stunt versions of that character to create those things that he would create. But in 2D animation, you could just do it. His face turns into Johnny Carson for a split second, and then, or it's Jack Nicholson, or he completely turns himself into a different shape. That all of those things, that was utilizing the strength of 2D animation, and then also using Al Hirschfeld lines to create some of those, some of those designs. That's when animation is doing something that CG animation cannot do. That's when it's at its strength. But yeah, I think that sadly, the 2D animation started to go into that CG realm, and CG could do it better. But I think that once at some point there's going to be a project, and somebody's going to figure out that they can create a 2D project that is unique and something that CG animation cannot do, and I think they're going to do well.
Yeah, and that will be connecting all those dots of nostalgia and the beauty of that medium, right?
Yeah, and it's funny because I've talked to several kids and about my daughter's age. So I've got two girls between 22 and 17, and whenever I talk to a group of enthusiasts, animation enthusiasts, they'll always go back like, well, what about 2D animation? Always trying to say, it's like, well, I worked in 2D animation. Now I'm working in CG animation. If you guys want 2D animation, it's going to be up to you. It's your generation that's going to bring it back. You guys are the ones that have to create it.
Like kind of like the heritage of jazz music or something, like an art form that that survives forever because people always remember it, right?
Yeah. And I think that's going to be them. they're going to be doing it. And you see little smatterings here and there of people still doing playing and utilizing the strength of 2D animation. And that's where you have things like the Song of the Sea, things like that, where they're utilizing pattern, flat graphic pattern, and they're using design in a way that you can't use. It's not as easy to do in CG animation, or you wouldn't want to. Why would you want to make a 3D movie look 2D?
Yeah. And that's kind of what's going back to Roger Rabbit. Richard Williams did some amazing scenes, like where they're in the kitchen and there's the floor and it's the checkers, and Roger's flying around. Like, that is not computer at all.
No.
He is a genius.
The human mind is capable of that.
Yeah.
So a lot of times you think like, oh, no, that's impossible. You can't do that. But you realize when you see something like Milt Kahl, when he's animating and he's doing Shere Khan, and you look, okay, that guy, that came out of that guy's head. There's not rotoscope. That came out of his head, and it went out through his hand. He put it on paper, and it's amazing. And Richard Williams is another one of these guys. When you look at those scenes, that lets you know what the human mind is capable of. You can do that. You can draw that. It is possible.
Yeah. And it's the craftsmen like you who are connecting those worlds and reminding us that there is a link between it all. And we kind of talked about this before we started recording, but there is a divine inspiration to art too. There can be, right? Like the spiritual element to what you do, I imagine. You're a spiritual person, would you say?
Oh my gosh, yeah. That's a really important component of who I am. And I think that there's a moral obligation to possessing this talent. You think of like in Spider-Man, there's, with great power comes great responsibility. There's a great truth to that. And that if you've been blessed with this talent, that it's important to utilize it in a way that is responsible. And I believe that I have a responsibility to God. When you think of, when I look at the world can be it's a very dangerous place, and it can be a very dark place. We have this talent, and we have an ability to create light, and we have an opportunity with our talent to share happiness. And I thought about this, and it's sort of complicated. Bear with me here. I was talking to this guy, and he was a surgeon. He was a brain surgeon, and he couldn't stop raving. He was an animation fan. He was talking about animation and this and that. And he wanted to know about this, and so here we are. It's like a podcast. So we sat there chatting with this fellow for a while, and he was like one of the premier brain surgeons in the world at one particular point. But he was already older now, and he had retired. And I told him, I said, well, what I do is kind of insignificant. I mean, I just make cartoons. That's what I do. And he said, no. He says, you have the significant job. He says, I just save lives. You make life worth living. And it really kind of impacted me. And I started thinking about more what he was saying, because sometimes we have a tendency to devalue what we do. And it's like, yeah, I just draw. I make cartoons. I make silly things. People laugh. They're amused. Yeah, but there is a greater responsibility to that. That when I think of, let's say, the darkest things out in the world, there's war, and there's a lot of cruelty out there. What is the antithesis of that? So you think of like the darkest forces out there. What's the antithesis to that? Well, you could say that, well, we would have another army to fight this other evil army, and the two would battle each other. Yes, as a physical thing, yes, that totally makes sense, that you would have, let's say, an opposing force to hold that force. Yes, I completely respect and understand that. But it's not necessarily diametrically opposite. It's diametrically opposing, but it's not diametrically opposite. What is the opposite of darkness?
Well, light, right?
It is light.
Yeah.
And that's where art comes in.
Yeah.
We bring light into this world. We share happiness. We share joy. We have the propensity to do that. So that's where I see my responsibility, that I have a responsibility to bring joy, to bring happiness, to bring light, and to combat those things that are dark in this world. When I think there's a lot of really serious things, the world has a lot of really serious problems. And what stands diametrically opposed to those forces of darkness are those forces of light. And that comes from our, from artists, from talent of, somebody who paints a picture. And when you look at it, you're emotionally moved. When you listen to a beautiful piece of music and, you well up with emotion. When you hear poetry and you just start crying, that is the beauty that artists have that are bringing this into this world. And that's why it's so responsible. That's why I believe that we have such an important role. And I never really thought about it until I had that conversation with, of all people, a brain surgeon.
Wow. And an intelligent man.
Very intelligent. Yeah. And he snapped me out of it because I have to admit that I didn't really give what it is that I do that much value until that conversation with him.
And Marcelo, it's interesting how the physics of cinema, it's light projected through film or now digitally, right?
Yeah.
So it's quite a literal point you made.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool.
Yeah, it is.
You've been, how long have you been at Sony Animation?
I have been here, it'll be 16 years in just a few more weeks.
Wow, a long tenure.
16 years, yeah.
Congrats.
Thank you. When this studio was starting up, so we have to go back 16 years ago, Disney had, this is when they were going through all their growing pains and this and that, they had bought up Pixar and they started to dismantle their studio, their animation studio. And that's where they started selling all their desks and all their equipment and all of that stuff started going out. And they cut their contracts. At the same time, Sony was trying to get into the world of CG animation, and they wanted to bring on board people who were familiar making animation to help them make these CG movies. I thought, if 2D animation is going to go away, I'm trying to read the tea leaves here. I thought, if 2D animation is going to go away, and this new thing is going to be CG animation, I better move back to LA and learn how they make these movies. And I had two offers. One was from DreamWorks and one was from Sony. And I had a friend of mine that was working here, Richie Chavez, fantastic, amazing artist. And I thought, I want to work with him. And that's why I came here.
What was your first project or some of your first projects?
Open Season.
Okay.
Yeah, so we started very first project here at the studio. It was Open Season. I think I did some designs for Open Season and I did some designs for Surf's Up. When I first got here, it was like my first couple weeks here, and I was already doing designs for both those projects. And both of those projects went into production here at Sony Pictures. It was the first and second picture.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So your IMDb credits are, there's a lot on there, huh?
Yeah.
Well, how many movies would you say, if you could ballpark, you've worked on?
Oh, my gosh. Here's the thing. For every project that I've worked on, there's probably another two more projects, at least 2 or 3 more projects that did not get made. So when you think about it, I would have to say probably it's a 3 or 4 to 1 ratio for projects.
Okay.
So they go into development and then they don't progress out of development. They just stay there and you move on to the next project and develop it. And then at a certain point, some of these grow legs and then you can actually take them all the way through to fruition. But oh my gosh, I think I worked on maybe 8 projects, I think, over at the Disney, 8 films, feature films. And here at Sony, I've worked on just about every single project with the exception of one, I think. I've done, yeah.
Wow.
I've had a little piece of something.
And you're must be one of the veteran animators here, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
you had to bring that up. And so I was like, well, you look very old, Marcelo.
No, definitely not.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting thing because I remember being sort of frustrated. I thought here I get into animation and the whole bottom falls out of the market and animation is going away, and here they're going into the CG animated movies and I don't know how to make those. And there was a bit of frustration there for me, but I came here, learned how to make the movies, and I realized how number one, how similar that process is. So it hasn't really changed all that much for me, because doing design and doing design for entertainment is going to be more or less the same. There's some things have changed. The way you design characters certainly has changed, like in just a technical aspect. But yeah, I think that when you look at that evolutionary process of as it went from 2D animation into CG animation, that I realized that I'm one of the few people that actually had their foot in both industries.
Yeah.
That I actually there are very, very few people that are working today in this industry that actually worked in 2D and now work in CG animation. Very few.
Wow. And you spoke earlier, we talked about mentors. I'm sure you have some mentees in the industry.
And that was it. Is
Yeah.
when I think about my role in the industry, and I've always wanted to have this mentor-mentee relationship, and I've had pieces of that, but I never really had a full connection with in the way that I sort of expected that it would unfold. But that doesn't mean that doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
I realized that in a mentor-mentee relationship, that you have two ways that you can experience it. You can experience it as the mentor, or you can experience it as the mentee. Now, I thought that I was going to get it as the mentee, but that doesn't mean that I still can't have that same relationship as the mentor. And so I try to be very open with what I know. I try to be very giving of what I know. Here's the thing, and one of these realizations happened to me when I was going to art school, and we were learning about J.C. Leyendecker. For those your fans that are unfamiliar with the name, look it up. J.C. Leyendecker, fantastic artwork. I love this guy's work. And then I found out that towards the end of his, and he was very secretive about how he worked. I wanted to know, what was his technique? How did he work? And never shared that with anybody. And he took that to the grave with him. The only person he shared it with was Norman Rockwell. And he had Norman Rockwell promise that he would never share it with anyone. So Norman Rockwell kept his promise. And J.C. Leyendecker took that technique to the grave with him. And I think that's a tremendous travesty. Now, I understand how important that was for him to protect his livelihood, because that was his look. But when he left, he took that with him. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to, because I think it's a loss. You figure things out, that's a gift, and I want to give that to somebody else and give the next generation, let them take it and run with it and evolve it.
Yeah.
And so that it stays alive. And it's sort of like in this life, we have an ability to create energy. And even in this conversation that we're having, I'm creating energy in my dialogue, and I put that out into the world. And that energy continues to run it. Every time somebody hears this interview, they hear this energy that's going out to them, and it carries in words, and it carries in thought, and perhaps they could find purpose in that. And then in that purpose, they carry now that energy. And so there's a kinetic line of energy. But for him, he inspired so many people with his work, and he allowed that to dissipate. And I think that's a travesty. And I remember how heartbroken I was. And I don't want to be that guy. I don't want what it is that I know to die with me. I want to be able to say, you know what, I was part of a process of that chain and that energy, and that the energy that was given to me by that guy that was doing all those drawings on that ship. I carry that with me, and I ball up all that energy, and then the doctor that I talked to, and then my mom with the crayons, and all of that energy, and I'm passing it to somebody else. And that somebody has that energy, and they're going to do something amazing with it as well. And I hope to be part of that process, part of that chain.
That's beautiful, man. And animation being energy and giving life to something inanimate, right?
Yeah.
A series of, that's your craft, that's your trade, what you do aesthetically.
Yeah, and it's funny because those pictures have a life.
Yeah, they do.
Really do. Because you think about it, like let's say our latest movie that we did here at Sony, which is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. That character does not exist. Not really. There's no real Miles Morales. And it's not. We don't even have an actor that is that character. No, we have a voice actor, so he's a part of Miles. Then there's the CG model that was modeled by somebody else, and that's part of the character. But and then there's the story, but everything, we put all of that together, then we're giving life to this thing that doesn't necessarily exist, but it exists in our idea of it. And that's a great thing. I love that. I love that we can create that and tell stories and inspire people.
And what you said earlier, with great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
And I like, you posted, you did the comic book cover as a tribute to the original
Yes.
Amazing Spider-Man debut, right?
Yes.
That's like getting to do purposeful homages and twists. I was just wondering, you finding personal satisfaction in your work, do you feel like you get to do that every day? Put a little Marcelo stamp on there?
I don't look for that.
Yeah.
The Marcelo stamp hopefully is the joy that I put into something.
Okay.
And I really try to give myself over to whatever it is that I'm working on. I try to and I really sense it. If I don't completely surrender to that moment and create something that is genuine and authentic, I don't know. I feel like I'm not really doing my job. So I really try to focus and pour myself into that. And hopefully that's my signature. But every now and then we get an opportunity where I had done the drawing of the director, when I had done that, the villain had a beanie. He was sort of a hipster kind of guy and had a beanie. And the director, Bob Perchetti, comes in to review the drawing. And he looks, and he's got a beanie. And so they started reviewing him. That looks like you. And I said, well, I can make it look like him. And so we all laughed. Sure enough, like a week later or so, I had that cover, and it looked just like Bob Perchetti.
A little Easter egg.
And it's an Easter egg, yeah. So when you think about it, it looks just like the cover, the original cover that was done way back in 1962 when Spider-Man came out. But but it's an alternate universe version of it, so it can't be identical. It wasn't like I just photoshopped some things. No, it's a completely all new drawing, all drawn in my style, but my way of drawing it. But it harkens back to the 1960s, and it has Bob Perchetti, our director, being sort of swept away by Spider-Man.
It's a craft to be able to distill something to its essence and make it new. Like one of my favorite pieces of all of the Roger Rabbit history is that drawing you have of Roger spinning and Benny with the dip around him.
Yeah.
And it's like being able to do different styles. That's cool. Like as a craft, I've never talked to anyone who's been able to, or met anyone who has that talent. So it's been really cool meeting you and talking about this.
Yeah. And that's one of those things that in creating this, being so diverse in what I do, I really take a lot of joy in that, and that comes from immersing myself. I have to really immerse myself into what I'm working on, and be faithful to what it is I'm working on. So if I'm working on Roger Rabbit, I'm faithful to that world. If I'm working on Spider-Man, I'm faithful to that world, and so that I feel like I can give them the best of my honesty. And in creating that, when audiences look at it, they can sense that, and they can say, yes, that looks honest. It doesn't look like, that's something that doesn't connect with the material.
It looks part of the quote unquote canon, right?
Yeah. And that's the greatest joy that I have, is to be part of that. And then again, it goes back to that energy. And now I'm part of that energy.
Well, I'm sure this conversation probably inspired a lot of young artists and creators. And Marcelo, as we wrap up, is there any wisdom or pearls of knowledge or something that maybe you had wanted to hear early in your career that we could pass on to some of our podcast listeners that might help them or inspire them?
Yeah, I think I do. And this may be sort of a bitter pill for some, actually. It might be some strong coffee, but this stuff is hard. And I think sometimes people get into it and they have an idea that it's going to be relatively easy. No, it's hard. It's hard stuff. And if it wasn't hard, there'd be a lot more people doing it.
Right. Yeah.
No, so if you want to work in this business and you derive great joy from doing this, And it's hard. Understand that it's supposed to be hard. Don't think like, oh gosh, I think it's harder for me than it is for Marcelo. Or Marcelo just makes it look easy. Oh, it must have been easy for him. No, it was very hard for me. It was very hard working. There's a lot of late nights, a lot of studying, a lot of training that went into it. When I was working at Disney, I was working already as a professional at Disney, doing my work. And I was going to 3 life drawing workshops a week and painting the figure on the weekends, on top of doing all my work that I was doing for Disney. So you figure, well, he's already working as a professional at Disney. What does he need to keep training for? No, that was me. And I kept training, I kept working, I kept studying. So if there are people out there and they would love to do what it is that I'm doing, understand that it is hard. And so if you're at school and you feel like you're at your wit's end and you feel that, oh my gosh, I don't know that I'm cut out for it. Tough it out. Just do the work. Do what you have to do. It is hard. It's sort of like bodybuilding, and somebody says, wow, these weights are heavy. Yes, they're supposed to be heavy. If they were light, you wouldn't be building muscle.
Right.
So it's supposed to be hard. So if people have an understanding that when they go into art and animation, if they love it, it won't be hard. That doesn't mean it's not going to be, that they're not going to have to work hard. They're going to have to work very hard. But it's not going to be a chore. It's not going to be painful to work on because it's what you want to do. But yeah, I think that, and hopefully that gives a sense of perspective for people so that they don't get the false impression that this is easy. And at the first, and let's say they've got a lot of talent, but the first time they meet adversity, they stop. I don't want them to stop. I want them to think like, no, it's supposed to be like this. I have to work through this period, or I have to work through this phase, or I have to learn how to do this.
So the idea of having faith that there's a reason for doing it, and faith in oneself and faith in something bigger, those are all very important things.
If you believe in the goal and you know that this is your industry, this is what you want to do, then go out and get it.
Yeah.
Then go, it's there. And it's funny because a lot of times other people talk themselves out of things and they say, oh no, well, that stuff's happening in California. There's no way that I could get to California. Look, I grew up in Maryland. I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. I didn't, my dad was a bricklayer and my mom worked as a seamstress and a factory worker as well. I had no connection to the art world. And in Baltimore, I had no connection to animation or film or anything like that. And here I am. So those things are possible. And I always tell people when I have talks to young people, I tell them, look, somebody's got to do the work. Why not you? Why can't it be you?
Yeah.
If you believe in yourself, go out and get that dream. It's there. It's waiting for you.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's such a great, beautiful note to end on, man. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate hearing that personally. You know what I mean? Like that inspires me. And I also appreciate how you were kind enough to let me come speak with you and talk about this stuff. And where do you recommend people check you out? You have a website with your work, right?
I have a website. It's Vignali Studio. Everything is more or less a Vignali Studio. So if you go to my Instagram, it's Vignali Studio. If you go to Facebook, again, Vignali Studio. But you can also look me up as Marcelo Vignali on social media. So I have got a website. I post some things on Facebook. I have an Instagram account, so you can follow. And I also have a Twitter account. And I don't know that I use my Twitter as a lot of people use their Twitter, but because a lot of people are very, very good at social media, and this is still sort of something foreign to me. But if there's something worthwhile, I try to put it out there.
And you are in the Roger Rabbit Facebook group. You've answered questions about your work connected to it, and that's awesome.
Yeah, if there's some questions and people put it out there, and I see it, I'll try to answer.
Well, thank you, man. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Really appreciate it. It's a pleasure meeting you, Andrew.
Hop in, I'm Benny the Cab. Just stick out your thumb and you'll be there in a flash. Hop in, I'm Benny the Cab. When you see me on the sidewalk, get out the way fast. Hop in, I'm Benny the Cab. And when it comes to the Dodgers, no, I'm not a fan. Hop in. in, I'm Benny the Cab. Take the bunny and run, Eddie V, that's the plan. First I moved to LA from New York like sorry. Revving up my engine, gas like a Ferrari. Are we ready for the ride of our lives? Cause I'm gone. And it's rough in these streets, strap in and hold on. Been driving fools around since 1910. Sister Mary Francis, he's done it again. Roger, why'd you have to tip off the Toon Patrol? To the movies we will go, but keep it on the low. I know Goofy's funny, but you gotta be quiet. Cause Rabbit's on the menu and Doom's not on a diet. With a pack of hungry weasels, evil and starving, I'm sliding through the dip and it's kind of alarming. So don't freeze the frame, I mean it. Turpentine, acetone, and benzene, we've seen it. Let's go back to the part where I'm saving the day. Yo, Roger, let me drive, get out of the way. Hop in, I'm Benny the Cab. Just stick out your thumb and you'll be there in a flash. Hop in, I'm Benny the Cab. When you see me on the sidewalk, get out the way fast. Hop in, I'm Benny the Cab. And when it comes to the Dodgers, no, I'm not a fan. Hop in, I'm Benny the Cab. Take the bunny and run, Eddie V, that's the plan. Okay, now crawl through the window, Roger, I'll get help. Save Jessica and Eddie, and yes, save yourself. Fight Greasy and Wheezy and the rest of the vermin. Smoking hella henchmen like your name was Baby Herman. With the stogie, hold up, G, what about the will? Roger's been a patsy ever since Acme was killed, and I don't appreciate it. Help us out, Santino, deciphering the fallout from Jessica's libido. But she's not bad, that's just how she's drawn. Well, Betty boops from serving drinks from sunset till dawn. No justice for tunes? Try that one again. Looks like we found the culprit and saved all our friends. These days you might find me on House of Mouse, hanging out with Max and Mickey on location, no doubt. It's been a crazy ride for the first self-driving car. Middle finger to your Uber, you can keep your 5 stars. Oh! Hop in, I'm Benny the Cab. Just stick out your thumb and you'll be there in a flash. Hop in, I'm Benny the Cab. When you see me on the sidewalk, get out the way fast. Hop in, I'm Benny the Cab. And when it comes to the Dodgers, no, I'm not a fan. Hop in, I'm Benny the Cab. Take the bunny and run, Eddie V, that's the plan. Why'd you lock me up for driving on the sidewalk? It was just a couple miles and nobody got hurt. Why'd you lock me up for driving on the sidewalk? It was just a couple miles and nobody got hurt. Why'd you lock me up for driving on the sidewalk? It was just a couple miles and nobody got hurt. Why'd you lock me up for driving on the sidewalk? It was just a couple miles and nobody got hurt. Benny the Cab.
Yo, that was awesome. Thank you, Marcelo. Thank you all for listening. Next week, we got D-Lyrical. And some of you might know, on YouTube, I was doing a Hatchet Chat series of all the ICP records in order, reviewing them. And I might pick that up again. It's kind of on hiatus. I was working on an ICP book project. But despite all that, D-Lyrical recorded Violent J's first demo. They worked on it together back in the day in Detroit. It was like Violent J's first release was doing this EP with D-Lyrical. So that's next week. I interviewed him. He came up to Cleveland when I was on tour with I Fight Dragons, and we recorded the interview in the meeting room at the library across the street from the venue, which was freaking awesome. D-Lyrical is the man, and he's not bitter about the fact that like he helped launch ICP, and then he became an engineer. He still puts out music. Humble guy, talented guy, sweetheart. So check that out. You can listen to the podcast as you are listening to it. So I don't need to plug where you can listen to it because you found where it is. But please leave a comment. Please leave a review. Please tell your friends. And until next week, thank you for listening. I'm MC Lars. Have a great week. Peace.